The morning mist clung to the sagebrush like cobwebs, and Ida Johnson moved through it with practiced silence. Her weathered hands, dark as the earth she walked upon, reached for the fever weed growing wild along the creek bed. 3 years in Silver Ridge had taught her which paths to take to avoid the townspeople's stares, which herbs grew where, and exactly how much loneliness a soul could bear. The black mare lay on her side in the clearing, ribs heaving with labored breath. Foam gathered at the corners of her mouth, and her eyes rolled back, showing only white. Ida had heard the animal's distress from her cabin, a sound that cut through the dawn like a blade. No owner in sight, just another creature left to die alone. "Easy now," Ida whispered, kneeling beside the horse. Her fingers traced the swollen belly, feeling the fever that burned beneath the hide. Colic, twisted bad, the kind that killed horses slow and painful. From her worn leather pouch, she pulled dried willow bark and crushed mint leaves. Her late husband Samuel had taught her this remedy, back when they'd worked the railroad camps together, back when she'd had someone who looked at her and saw a woman, not a curse. The mare's breathing steadied as Ida's hands worked. She pressed specific points along the animal's neck and belly, releasing trapped air, easing the twisted gut. Words came unbidden, not English, but older sounds her grandmother had taught her. Sounds that seemed to reach past fear into something deeper. An hour passed. The sun climbed higher, burning off the mist. The mare's eyes cleared, and she lifted her head, nickering soft. "That's my horse." Ida didn't turn at the voice. She'd heard the footsteps 10 minutes ago, heavy boots, purposeful stride, rancher, by the sound, probably Henderson's man. "She was dying," Ida said simply, helping the mare to her feet. "What did you do to her?" Now she turned. The cowboy stood 20 feet away, hand resting on his pistol. Young, maybe 25, with the suspicious eyes she'd grown accustomed to. "I helped her." "Helped?" He spat tobacco juice into the dust. "That's what you call it? I saw you whisperin' over her, saw you putting your hands on her." The mare walked to her owner, steady now, and nuzzled his shoulder. He pushed her away, eyes never leaving Ida. "How much?" "Nothing. Nothing." His laugh was ugly. "The witch wants nothing? Maybe you already took something. Maybe you put the sickness in her first, so you could play savior." Ida gathered her pouch, movements deliberate and calm. 3 years of this. 3 years of healing their animals and their children in secret, only to be cursed for it in daylight. "Don't touch me," she said quietly as he stepped forward. He stopped, but his sneer deepened. "Wouldn't dream of it. Might catch whatever darkness you carry." By the time Ida reached her cabin, word had already spread. She could tell by the way Mrs. Garrett pulled her daughter inside as Ida passed, by how the men at the hardware store stopped talking to watch her walk by. The witch had been caught working her magic again. Her cabin sat a half-mile outside town, where the civilized world ended and the wilderness began. 1 room, solid, built by her own hands from salvaged lumber and river stones. Inside, herbs hung from the rafters, feverfew, elderberry, sage, glass jars lined rough shelves, filled with tinctures and powders, a narrow bed, a cast-iron stove, a rocking chair Samuel had made their first year married. She sat in that chair now, letting the familiar creak soothe her. Through the single window, she watched the sun paint the distant mountains gold. Somewhere out there, the mare was breathing easy, walking smooth. That had to be enough. A knock at the door, soft, tentative. Ida didn't move. "Mrs. Johnson," a child's voice. "It's Lucy Turner. My baby brother's sick again." Ida recognized the voice. The Turner family lived in a dugout by the river, too poor for the doctor's fees. She'd helped them before, always after dark, always in secret. "Leave him on the step," Ida called. "I'll tend to him. Mama says to tell you she's sorry about what people say. Tell your mama to keep her apologies. Just keep quiet about coming here." Small footsteps retreated. When Ida opened the door, she found the baby wrapped in a threadbare blanket, burning with fever, whooping cough, by the sound of his breathing. She brought him inside, already mixing honey with wild cherry bark. As she worked, she thought about the mare, about the cowboy's suspicious eyes, about the weight of being needed and hated in equal measure. The baby's fever broke near midnight. Ida walked him back to the Turner dugout, moving through darkness like she belonged to it. Mrs. Turner took her child with tears in her eyes, pressing a jar of preserves into Ida's hands despite her protests. Walking home, Ida noticed lights still burning in town, unusual for this hour. As she drew closer to her cabin, she saw why. Fresh paint gleamed on her door in the moonlight. Still wet. Witch. Cursed. Leave or burn. She stood there a long moment, preserves jar heavy in her hands. The paint smelled sharp. Chemical. Someone had spent good money on it, money that could have bought food or medicine, but hate always found funding in Silver Ridge. Inside, she barred the door and checked the loaded rifle by her bed. Then she sat in Samuel's chair and opened the preserves. Strawberry, made with sugar misses. Turner couldn't afford to spare. She ate it slowly, spoonful by spoonful, tasting sweetness and sorrow in equal measure. Outside, an owl called across the darkness. Ida closed her eyes and listened, remembering Samuel's voice. Some folks fear what helps them most. But healing's a gift, Ida. Don't let their fear stop your hands. "Don't touch me," she whispered to the empty room. The words had become her shield, her boundary against a world that wanted her gifts but not her presence. Tomorrow would bring more sick animals, more desperate parents, more hate painted on wood and whispered in streets. She would heal them anyway. It's what Samuel would have wanted. It's what her grandmother would have done. And in the end, it's all she had left. These hands that could pull life back from the edge of death, even as her own life balanced on the knife's edge of the town's tolerance. The candle burned low as Ida prepared for bed. Tomorrow, she'd scrub the paint from her door. Tomorrow, she'd gather more herbs. Tomorrow, she'd continue the delicate dance of being necessary and unwanted. But tonight, she sat in darkness and remembered what it felt like to be touched with love instead of fear, to speak without watching eyes judge every word, to be seen as a woman instead of a witch. The owl called again, closer now. Ida smiled, small and sad. At least the wild things didn't fear her. At least the night didn't judge. And in the morning, when someone's child burned with fever or their best horse lay dying, they would come to her door again, hate and need warring in their eyes. She would help them. She always did. But she would not let them touch her. Not anymore. That boundary was all she had left to protect the fragments of her heart that still remembered how to hope. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the small dramas of Silver Ridge. But Ida Johnson, the woman they called Witch, sat wakeful in her chair, preserves jar empty in her lap, preparing for another day of healing those who despised her. It was a lonely calling, but it was hers. And somewhere in the darkness, that black mare was breathing easy, walking smooth beneath the same cold stars. Buck McCoy stood at the edge of Silver Ridge's main street, his massive frame casting a shadow that stretched near 20 feet in the afternoon sun. At 6 feet 8 inches, he was a giant among men, with shoulders broad enough to fill most doorways and hands that could palm a man's skull like an apple. The war had left its marks on him, scars that ran deeper than skin, memories that surfaced in the small hours when sleep wouldn't come. He'd been marshal for 3 months now, not by choice, but by necessity. The previous lawman had taken one look at the growing tensions in town and headed for California. The mayor, desperate and calculating, had offered Buck the badge knowing that his size alone would discourage most troublemakers. What the mayor didn't know was that Buck had no interest in law or order. He'd taken the job for one reason only. It paid enough to keep a roof over Lily's head. "Uncle Buck!" The voice cut through his brooding like sunshine through storm clouds. Lily came running down the boardwalk, her 12-year-old legs pumping hard, blonde braids flying behind her. She crashed into his legs with the force of a small tornado, wrapping her arms around his waist as far as they would go. "Easy there, little bird," he said, his voice gentling in a way it did for no one else. "You'll knock me clean over." She laughed, the sound bright as creek water. Nothing could knock you over. You're stronger than Paul Bunyan." He lifted her effortlessly, setting her on his broad shoulder where she perched like she belonged there. Together they walked toward their small house at the town's edge. Lily chattering about her day at school, about the new teacher from Boston who wore spectacles and knew Latin. Buck half listened, his mind on other things. The house needed repairs before winter. The roof leaked in 2 places, and the chimney drew poorly. But looking at Lily's animated face, feeling her small hand patting his head as she talked, he knew he'd figure it out. He always did. He had to. She was all he had left of his sister Margaret, all he had left of family at all. The cholera had taken Margaret and her husband 2 years back, leaving Lily orphaned at 10. Buck had been drifting then, working cattle drives and avoiding anything that reminded him of the war. But one look at his niece's tear-stained face at the funeral, and he'd known his drifting days were done. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm the best at arithmetic in the whole class," Lily was saying. "She says I could be a bookkeeper someday, or even a teacher myself." "That's fine, little bird. Real fine." "Uncle Buck." Her voice changed, growing smaller. "My head hurts again." He lifted her down immediately, studying her face. She'd been having headaches for a week now, but she looked pale today. Shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there this morning. "How bad?" "Not too bad." She lied, but he saw her wince when she turned her head. "I'm just tired." He carried her the rest of the way home, her head resting on his shoulder. Inside their modest house, he tucked her into bed, noting how hot her forehead felt beneath his palm. "I'll make some willow bark tea," he said, but she was already drifting off, her breathing shallow and quick. The next morning, Buck woke to the sound of crying. He found Lily tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, her skin burning with fever. "It hurts," she whimpered. "Everything hurts." But it was what he saw next that sent ice through his veins. Red marks had appeared on her arms overnight, strange, twisting patterns that looked like tree roots spreading beneath her skin. They pulsed, faintly, as if something moved within them. Buck bundled her in blankets and carried her to Dr. Whitmore's office, not caring that it was barely dawn. The doctor, roused from sleep, examined Lily with increasing alarm. "I've never seen anything like this," Whitmore admitted, his usually composed face troubled. "These marks, they're not any disease I know, and her fever, it should have killed her already. But she's holding on." "Then do something," Buck's voice boomed in the small office, rattling medicine bottles on their shelves. "I've given her laudanum for the pain and tried to bring down the fever, but—" Whitmore spread his hands helplessly. "I'm sorry, Buck. Whatever this is, it's beyond my knowledge. I'd estimate she has perhaps a week, maybe less." Buck stared at the doctor, then at Lily's small form on the examination table. The red marks had spread to her neck now, creeping up toward her face like living things. "There has to be something," he said, his voice breaking. "Someone who can help." Whitmore hesitated, then shook his head. "No reputable physician would know more than I do about this condition." "What about someone not reputable?" The doctor's face went carefully blank. "I couldn't recommend that. It would be inappropriate." Buck grabbed the front of Whitmore's nightshirt, lifting the smaller man off his feet. "My niece is dying. I don't give a damn about appropriate. The Johnson woman." Whitmore gasped. "The one they call— But I'm not suggesting—" Buck was already moving, carrying Lily out into the growing storm. He knew who Whitmore meant. Everyone in Silver Ridge knew about the woman who lived outside town, the one they whispered about in the saloon and the church alike, the witch. The rain had started by the time he reached her cabin, fat drops that quickly became a deluge. He kicked the door rather than knock, Lily burning in his arms. "Open up!" he shouted over the thunder. "Please, I need help." The door opened, and Buck found himself looking down at a woman whose eyes held more sorrow than he'd seen since the war. She was smaller than he'd expected, dressed simple but clean. with graying hair pulled back from a face that might have been beautiful before life had worn it down. "Don't touch me," she said quietly, but her eyes were on Lily, on the red marks visible above the blanket. "Please," Buck said, and in that single word was every prayer he'd never learned to say. "She's dying. She's all I have. I'll give you anything, money, protection, anything. Just, please." Ida Johnson looked at him for a long moment, this giant of a man with tears cutting tracks down his weathered face. Then she stepped aside. "Bring her in. Lay her on the bed." Buck ducked through the doorway, noting the herbs hanging from the rafters, the neat rows of jars and bottles. It smelled of sage and something else, something clean and old and comforting. He laid Lily on the narrow bed, smoothing her hair back from her fevered face. The red marks had reached her jaw now, and her breathing was labored, rattling in her chest. "What's her name?" Ida asked, rolling up her sleeves. "Lily McCoy. She's 12. "And the marks, when did they start?" "Last night, but she's been sick for a week. Headaches, tiredness." His voice broke. "I should have brought her sooner. I should have—" "Hush now," Ida said, and there was something in her voice that reminded him of his mother, dead these 20 years. "Blame won't help her." She moved to the bed, hovering her hands over Lily without quite touching her. Her face changed, growing distant and focused at once. "These marks," she murmured. "This isn't natural sickness." "What do you mean?" But Ida wasn't listening. She placed her hands on Lily's forehead, and Buck saw her whole body go rigid. Her eyes rolled back, showing only white, and she began to speak in a language he didn't recognize. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Lily's body arched off the bed, the red marks glowing bright as fresh blood. Buck started forward, but Ida's voice stopped him. "Stay back. Whatever you do, don't interfere." The minutes stretched like hours. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, there was only the sound of Ida's chanting and Lily's labored breathing. Then, suddenly, Ida gasped and stumbled backward. "Water," she said, her voice hoarse. "The water! It's in the water!" Buck caught her before she could fall, surprised by how light she felt in his massive hands. "What about the water? Not disease," she managed. "Poison. Deliberate. The marks, they show the path through her body. Someone's poisoning your town's water supply." She pulled away from him, that careful distance restored. "Don't touch me," she reminded, but her voice was gentle. Buck looked from her to Lily, who seemed to be breathing easier now, the red marks fading slightly. "Can you save her?" "Maybe, but she'll need more than I can give her here. Clean water from outside town. Special herbs I'll have to gather. And time." She met his eyes. "I'll need your help." "Anything. You might not say that when you hear what I need. The townspeople already fear me. If they see you bringing your niece here, trusting me." She shrugged. "You're the marshal. You have a reputation to think of." Buck looked at Lily's small form on the bed, at this woman who was her only hope. "I've got nothing but Lily. No reputation worth more than her life." Ida studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we begin. But know this, what's happening to her is happening to others. I've sensed it, children, mostly. Something's very wrong in Silver Ridge. Marshal McCoy, and I fear your niece is just the beginning." Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the cabin in stark relief. Buck McCoy, giant of a man who'd survived war and loss and loneliness, found himself praying for the first time since Margaret died. Not to God, exactly, but to whatever forces might listen to a desperate man's plea. Let her live, he thought. Let this strange, sad woman save her. I'll pay any price, face any consequence, as if hearing his thoughts. Ida looked up from where she was mixing herbs. "There will be a price," she said quietly. "There always is. The question is whether Silver Ridge is willing to pay it." Buck didn't care about Silver Ridge. He cared about the little girl who called him Uncle Buck and sat on his shoulder like she belonged there. For her, he'd pay any price at all. The storm raged on. And in a small cabin at the edge of civilization, two outcasts began a fight against an evil neither of them yet understood. The storm had grown worse, turning the dirt path to mud that sucked at Buck's boots as he carried Lily through the darkness. Lightning illuminated their way in jagged bursts, showing glimpses of Ida's cabin through the driving rain. His massive frame shielded Lily from the worst of it, but she still whimpered against his chest, the red marks on her skin pulsing with each thunderclap. "Please," he said again as Ida opened the door, water streaming from his hat brim. "She's dying." Ida stepped aside without a word, though Buck noticed how she pressed herself against the wall to avoid any chance of contact as he passed. The cabin's warmth hit him like a physical thing after the cold rain, and he saw Lily's eyes flutter open briefly before closing again. "On the bed," Ida instructed, already moving to her shelves of herbs and tinctures. "Remove her wet clothes and wrap her in those blankets." Buck hesitated. It wasn't proper, him undressing his niece, but Ida was already turned away, grinding something with a mortar and pestle. He worked quickly, trying not to look at how the red marks had spread across Lily's thin chest, creating patterns that seemed almost deliberate in their design. "Uncle Buck?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "Am I going to die?" "No, little bird. No, you're not." He tucked the blankets around her, his large hands surprisingly gentle. "This lady's going to help you." Ida approached then, carrying a bowl of something that smelled of mint and earth. She paused at the bedside, looking down at the child with an expression Buck couldn't read. "Don't touch me," she said softly, though she wasn't speaking to either of them. It seemed more like a reminder to herself, a prayer or a ward against something only she understood. Then she placed her hands on Lily's forehead. The change was immediate. Ida's body went rigid, her eyes rolling back until only the white showed. Her breathing synchronized with Lily's labored gasps, and the red marks on the child's skin began to glow brighter. Buck started forward instinctively, but Ida's voice stopped him, though it wasn't quite her voice anymore. It was deeper, older, carrying echoes of something beyond the cabin's walls. "Water flows beneath stone, carries death in its belly. Silver torn from mountain's heart, poison seeps where children drink." Images flashed through Buck's mind, though he couldn't say how he was seeing them. A mine shaft, abandoned and flooded. Barrels marked with symbols he didn't recognize. Men in city clothes shaking hands with, "Whitmore!" Ida gasped, her own voice returning as she swayed on her feet. Buck caught her elbow automatically, steadying her. "Don't," she began, then stopped, looking at where his hand held her arm. For a moment, neither moved. Then she pulled away, that careful distance restored. "Don't touch me." "What did you see?" Buck asked, though part of him already knew. "The old Silver Peak mine. Someone's using it to dump chemicals. Industrial waste from back east. It's seeping into the underground water table, contaminating wells throughout town." She moved to her herbs again, hands shaking slightly. "The children are most affected because they're smaller, more vulnerable. Your Lily, she must drink more water than most." "She's always thirsty," Buck confirmed. "Always has been, even as a baby. Margaret used to joke." His voice caught. Ida looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something shift in her dark eyes, recognition of a pain she knew too well. The marks on her skin, they're following her blood vessels, showing how the poison moves through her body. It's methodical, calculated. Someone knew exactly what would happen. "You said Whitmore's name. You saying Doc Whitmore's involved?" "I saw him in the vision, taking money, signing papers. But visions can be unclear. I need to touch her again. See more." She returned to Lily's bedside, hesitating. Buck saw her steel herself before placing her hands on the child once more. This time, he was ready for the change. For the way her body seized and her eyes went white, the vision lasted longer this time. Ida's lips moved, forming silent words, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cabin's coolness. The red marks on Lily's skin pulsed in rhythm with Ida's heartbeat, growing brighter, then dimmer, then bright again. When it ended, Ida collapsed. Buck caught her before she hit the floor, scooping her up as easily as he did Lily. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, bird bones and worn cotton. He set her in the rocking chair, then knelt beside her, a giant making himself small. "What did you see?" She breathed deep, gathering strength. "Everything. The mining company, Eastern Continental Industries. They're paying Whitmore to keep quiet about the sickness, to misdiagnose it. They've been dumping waste for over a year. Cyanide compounds from gold processing, mercury, arsenic. The abandoned mine gives them perfect cover. But why? Why poison a whole town? They don't care about the town. It's cheaper than proper disposal. A few $1,000s to Whitmore versus tens of thousands to handle the waste correctly." Her voice grew bitter. "What's a few dead children against profit?" Buck's hands clenched into fists the size of hams. "I'll kill him." "No." Ida stood, swaying slightly. "Killing Whitmore won't save Lily or the others. We need proof, and we need to get her clean water. Herbs that can bind the toxins and help her body expel them." "Tell me what to do?" She studied him, this massive man who'd humbled himself to beg for her help. "It'll be dangerous. If Whitmore realizes we know, I don't care about danger. Tell me what to do." Ida moved to her shelves, pulling down jars and bundles. "First, water. There's a spring 2 miles north. Feeds from a different source than the town wells. Take these containers. Fill them all. While you're gone, I'll prepare what medicines I can. But some herbs I'll need to gather fresh. In this storm, the storm's a blessing. It'll hide our movements." She packed herbs into a leather pouch. "There's something else. Lily's not the only one sick. I can feel them. Other children, suffering. Their fear calls to me like—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Like what?" "Like my own daughters did, before she died." The words came out flat, matter of fact. But Buck heard the avalanche of pain behind them. "We couldn't afford a doctor. I tried everything I knew, but I didn't know enough then. Didn't have the gift yet. I'm sorry." "Don't touch me," she said automatically, though he hadn't moved. "Just go. Get the water. Every minute matters now." Buck gathered the containers, then paused at the door. "Why help us? The town treats you like a pariah? A witch?" She almost smiled. "Because once I begged for help and found none. Because your Lily doesn't deserve to die for the sins of others. Because despite everything, I took an oath once. Not the doctor's oath, but an older one. To heal where I can. To fight death where I find it. Even for those who hate you. Especially for them. Hatred is just fear wearing a mask, and fear—" She looked at Lily, whose breathing had eased slightly. "Fear can be healed too, given time." Buck ducked out into the storm. Containers clanking. The journey to the spring seemed endless. Rain lashing his face. Mud trying to trap his boots. But he thought of Lily, of the red marks spreading like roots beneath her skin, and pushed on. When he returned, soaked and exhausted, he found Ada sitting beside Lily, not touching her but watching intently. She'd arranged herbs in careful patterns on the bedside table, and the air smelled of sage and something sweeter. "Good," she said, taking the water. "Now help me lift her. She needs to drink this slowly. Willow bark, charcoal, and blessed thistle. It'll help draw out the poisons." Together they worked through the night, Buck holding Lily upright while Ida spooned medicine between the child's lips. Neither spoke of how their hands almost touched during the process, of how they moved in careful choreography to maintain that crucial distance. As dawn broke, gray and watery through the cabin's single window, Lily's fever finally broke. The red marks had faded to pink lines, no longer pulsing with that unnatural light. "Uncle Buck?" Her voice was weak but clear. "I'm thirsty. Here, little bird." He gave her clean spring water, tears running unashamedly down his weathered face. "Drink slow." Ida stood, exhaustion clear in every line of her body. "She'll need more treatment. Days of it. And we still have to deal with the source, the mine, Whitmore. All of it." "We will," Buck said firmly. "Together." Don't touch me, she reminded. But for the first time, there was something almost like regret in the words. I won't, he promised. But Ida, thank you for everything. She looked at him then, this giant who'd cried for a child, who'd humbled himself to save what he loved. Don't thank me yet, Marshal McCoy. The real fight's just beginning. And before it's over, this town will have to choose between their fear of me and their children's lives. Outside, the storm was breaking, sunlight piercing the clouds in long fingers. But in Silver Ridge, Buck knew. A different kind of storm was just beginning to gather. The moon hung low and bloated over Silver Peak Mine, casting long shadows across the abandoned buildings. Buck moved silently for a man his size. Years of tracking rustlers serving him well as he and Ida approached the chain-link fence that hadn't been there 6 months ago. New fence, new padlocks, Buck whispered. For a mine that's supposed to be sealed. Ida nodded, pulling her dark shawl tighter. They'd left Lily sleeping in the cabin, her breathing steady for the first time in days. The herbs were working, but slowly. Too slowly for the other children in town who didn't have Ida's help. There. She pointed to a section where the fence had been cut and hastily repaired. Someone else has been here. Buck produced wire cutters from his coat, making quick work of the repair job. They slipped through into the mine compound, boots crunching on gravel that gleamed oddly in the moonlight. Don't step in the puddles, Ida warned. The water here, it's wrong, dead. Buck looked closer and saw she was right. The standing water reflected the moon like mirrors. Too bright, too still. No insects buzzed near them. No life at all. The mine entrance yawned before them, timber supports creating a mouth into the mountain. Fresh wheel ruts led inside, deep ones, from heavy wagons. Recent, Buck observed. Maybe 2-3 days old. They entered the mine, Buck lighting a lantern he'd brought. The yellow glow pushed back the darkness, revealing a tunnel that should have been collapsed, but instead showed signs of recent shoring. New timbers braced the ceiling, and the floor had been cleared of debris. 50 feet in, they found the first barrels. They were stacked 3 high against the tunnel wall. Industrial markings burned into the wood. Eastern Continental Industries curved across each lid, along with symbols Buck didn't recognize. Skulls, crossbones, warnings in languages he couldn't read. Don't touch them, Ida said unnecessarily. The barrels seemed to radiate wrongness, their presence in the mine as unnatural as snow in July. She approached one carefully, hovering her hand above its surface. Buck saw her shoulders tense, saw the now familiar distant look cross her face. They've been coming at night, she murmured. 3 men. They roll them deep into the mine, to where it floods. The water carries it all away, down into the water table, into the town's wells. How many barrels? Dozens, maybe hundreds. They've been doing this for... She gasped, pulling her hand back. Over a year, since the mine officially closed. Buck felt rage building in his chest, hot and familiar. He'd felt it during the war, when he'd seen what men could do to each other for money or power. But this, poisoning children for profit, this was worse somehow. We need evidence, he said, forcing his voice steady. Something to take to the federal marshals. They moved deeper into the mine, following the wheel tracks. The tunnel branched, and they took the left fork where the ruts were deepest. The air grew thick, chemical, burning their throats. In a natural cavern deep in the mountain, they found the dumping ground. Barrels lay scattered, some broken open, their contents seeping into an underground pool that fed the aquifer. The smell was overwhelming. Bitter almonds, sulfur, something metallic that coated the tongue. Papers littered the ground, some floating in the poisoned water. Cover your mouth, Ida said, tying her shawl across her face. These fumes. Buck did the same with his bandana, then began gathering papers. Most were shipping manifests, but some were letters. His reading wasn't the best. Margaret had been the educated one, but he could make out enough. Contracts, he said, between Eastern Continental and... Damn. Whitmore's signature. He's getting $50 a month to keep quiet. There's more, Ida said. She stood at the pool's edge, that distant look in her eyes again. I can see. Meetings, men in fine suits. They know exactly what they're doing. They've done it before. Other towns. When too many die, they simply move on. She swayed, and Buck instinctively reached out to steady her, catching himself just before contact. "Don't touch me," she whispered, but she was looking at him with something like wonder. "You remember. Even here, even now. You remember." "I promised," he said simply. They gathered what evidence they could. Manifests, letters, a sample of the poisoned water in a sealed jar. As they prepared to leave, voices echoed down the tunnel. "Said 3 more barrels tonight. Boss wants them deep." Buck extinguished the lantern immediately. In the darkness, he felt Ida's presence beside him, heard her controlled breathing. The voices grew closer, along with the creak of wagon wheels. 3 men entered the cavern, their own lanterns casting wild shadows. Buck recognized one immediately. Tom Garrett, who worked at the freight office. The other 2 were strangers, rough men with city clothes and country manners. "Stinks worse every time." One said, "How many kids now?" "Who's counting?" Garrett laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "Doc says maybe a dozen sick. Few more weeks. They'll start dying proper. Town'll panic. Probably abandon the place. Then the company can buy up the land cheap." "Clever," the second stranger said. "Kill 'em slow. Make it look like disease. By the time anyone figures it out, we're long gone." Buck's hand found his pistol, but Ida touched his arm, the lightest contact. Gone before he fully registered it. He understood. Not yet. Not until Lily and the other children were safe. The men unloaded their barrels, rolling them to the pool's edge. One split open on a rock, spilling crystalline powder that glowed faintly in the lantern light. "Careful, you fool!" Garrett snapped. "That's pure cyanide salt. Get it on your skin and you'll be dead before dawn." They finished their work quickly after that, eager to leave the poisoned air. Buck and Ida waited, pressed into a crevice, until the voices faded completely. "We have enough," Ida said finally. "Evidence to hang them all." But as they made their way out, Buck noticed something that chilled him more than the poison. Fresh boot prints in the tunnel dust, small, delicate. A woman's boots. "Someone else knows?" he said. Ida looked at the prints, her face troubled. "Or someone else is involved." "Buck, in my visions, there was a woman. I couldn't see her clearly, but she was there, in the shadows of every meeting." They emerged into clean night air, both gasping gratefully. The moon had set, leaving only starlight to guide them back to town. As they walked, Buck found himself studying Ida's profile, this woman who faced horrors without flinching, who saved those who despised her. "Why do you say it?" he asked suddenly. "Don't touch me." Why those words? She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, softly, "My grandmother taught me. She had the gift too, the healing sight. She said touch made it stronger but also more dangerous. You could lose yourself in others' pain, drown in their memories. But more than that." "What?" "People fear what they don't understand. A woman who can see their secrets with a touch. They burned my grandmother's sister for less. So we learned to keep distance, to say the words that would keep us safe. Don't touch me. A barrier built of words when walls weren't enough. But you touched Lily. You touch all those you heal." "Yes," she said simply. "The gift demands sacrifice. To heal, I must risk. But casual touch, friendship, love." She shook her head. "Those are luxuries I can't afford." They'd reached the edge of town, where Buck would go one way and she another. He wanted to say something, to offer comfort for a loneliness he recognized all too well. But the words wouldn't come. "Tomorrow," he said instead. "I'll take what we found to the federal office in Canyon City. They have jurisdiction over territorial crimes. And the children? Keep them alive until I get back, whatever it takes." "Don't touch me," she said, but this time it sounded different. Less like a warning, more like a regret. Buck watched her disappear into the darkness, then turned toward home, where Lily waited. In his pocket, the evidence weighed heavy, papers that would bring justice. He hoped, but he couldn't shake the image of those small boot prints in the mine, or the feeling that they'd only seen part of a larger horror. Somewhere in Silver Ridge, children tossed in fevered sleep while their parents prayed to a God who seemed to have forgotten this corner of the world. And in her lonely cabin, a woman who could heal with a touch sat carefully apart from all human contact, paying the price for a gift she'd never asked for. The war between justice and greed was about to begin in earnest. Buck just prayed they'd all survive to see its end. The rumors started with Mrs. Henderson at the general store. By noon, it had spread through Silver Ridge like wildfire in drought season. The McCoy girl was dying, and he took her to that witch woman. I heard she put her hands on the child, spoke in tongues. My husband saw Buck carrying water from the old spring, working with her. He is. Always knew there was something off about a man that size. Unnatural, both of them. By the time Buck returned from sending telegrams to the federal marshals, a crowd had gathered outside the jail. 20 men. Some women, too. Faces twisted with the particular ugliness that came from fear mixed with righteousness. "Marshal," Judge Hartley stepped forward, a man who'd never missed a Sunday service or an opportunity to foreclose on a widow. "We need to discuss your associations." Buck looked over the crowd, noting who was there and who wasn't. Tom Garrett stood at the back, trying to look inconspicuous. Interesting. "My associations are my business, Judge." "Not when you're wearing that badge. Not when you're consorting with that creature, Mrs." Garrett spat the words. "She's poisoned our children. First makes them sick, then pretends to cure them. It's how her kind operates." "Her kind?" Buck's voice dropped low. "Dangerous. Witches, devil worshippers. She caught herself at Buck's expression. "Undesirables." "Lily!" A child's scream cut through the mob's murmur. Buck turned to see young Thomas Turner running down the street. "She took Lily and the others." Buck's blood went cold. He'd left Lily sleeping at home, getting stronger but still weak. "What do you mean, took her?" "That woman, the witch. She came to town with a wagon, said the water was poisoned, said she could help. Parents didn't believe her, but the children, they were so sick, she loaded them up. Lily, my brother James, the Olsen twins, little Mary Fitzgerald, 6 of them. All told, took them into the mountains." The crowd erupted. "She's stealing our children. Probably for some ritual. String her up." Buck roared. Actually roared. A sound that silenced the mob instantly. "Enough." He drew his pistol, not pointing it at anyone but making its presence known. "Thomas, which way did they go?" "North Road, toward Crystal Creek." Of course, the clean water. Ida had taken matters into her own hands when the parents wouldn't listen. But the mob wouldn't understand that. They were beyond reason now, beyond anything but blood. "We ride," someone shouted. "Save our children from that witch." "You ride with me or not at all," Buck said. "And we go by law, not by rope." But he could see it in their eyes. The law was the last thing on their minds. The ride into the mountains was chaos. 30 riders, maybe more, armed with everything from rifles to pitchforks. Buck led, pushing his horse hard, torn between needing to reach Ida before the mob and knowing he was leading them straight to her. They found her wagon by Crystal Creek, exactly where Thomas had said. But instead of some dark ritual, they found a scene that stopped even the mob in its tracks. Ida had created a camp by the clean water. The 6 children lay on blankets in a circle, and she moved between them, administering medicines, cooling fevers. The red marks that had covered Lily were visible on all of them now, but fainter, already beginning to fade. She looked up at the sound of horses, saw the mob, saw Buck. Her face showed no surprise, only a deep weariness. "Don't touch me," she said quietly, though no one had moved. "She's cursed them." "Mrs." Olsen cried, seeing her twins lying still. "Look at those marks. The marks show the poison leaving their bodies, Ada said. Your well water is contaminated. Industrial waste from lies. Doctor. Whitmore pushed through the crowd on his gray mare. This woman is delusional. Those marks are clearly signs of her witchcraft. Buck noticed how Whitmore's hands shook, how sweat beaded his forehead despite the mountain coolness. Guilty conscience or fear of exposure? Step away from the children, Hartley ordered. You're under arrest for kidnapping and witchcraft. Witchcraft's not illegal, Buck said. And she didn't kidnap anyone. She saved them when their parents wouldn't listen. You defend her? Whitmore's voice went shrill. Look at you. She's enchanted you, turned you against your own people. The mob pressed closer. Someone had brought rope. Lily stirred on her blanket, eyes fluttering open. Uncle Buck? He dismounted, moving to her side. The other children were stirring too, the Olsen twins sitting up. Confused but clear-eyed for the first time in days, Mama, little Mary Fitzgerald called out. But the parents held back, afraid to approach their own children while Ida was near. She's healing them, Buck said. Can't you see that? Look at them, really look. When's the last time any of them were this alert? It's a trick, Whitmore insisted. She'll demand payment, mark my words. Your children's souls, probably. Ida stood slowly, facing the mob. I've asked for nothing. I've taken nothing but the risk of bringing them here, to clean water, where they could heal. Then why the secrecy? Hartley demanded. Why steal them away? Because you wouldn't have let me help. Because you'd rather see them die than accept healing from someone you fear. We fear you for good reason. Mrs. Henderson pushed forward. My own mother told me about your kind, how you curse cattle, blight crops, bring disease. The disease comes from your wells, Ida said patiently. From the mine, from men who— More lies, Whitmore shouted over her. She seeks to divide us, turn us against each other. The rope appeared in someone's hands. The mob pressed closer. Buck drew his gun. First one who touches her or these children gets a bullet, badge or no badge. You'd shoot your own people for this witch? Garrett finally spoke from the back. I'd shoot anyone who tries to lynch a woman for saving children. Uncle Buck. Lily's voice was stronger now. I'm thirsty. Ida moved toward the creek with a cup, but the mob surged forward. Don't let her near the water. She'll poison it. In the chaos that followed, Buck saw it all happen as if in slow motion. Someone threw a rock. It caught Ida on the temple, dropping her to her knees. Blood ran down her face as she tried to reach the cup, still thinking of Lily's thirst even as the mob closed in. Stop! The voice that rang out wasn't Buck's. It was small Mary Fitzgerald, standing on shaky legs, pointing at the crowd. Stop hurting her! She made the fire in my head go away. She's good. One by one, the other children stood. James Turner, the Olsen twins, even Lily, wobbly but determined, they formed a protective circle around Ada. These children who'd been dying just hours before. She saved us, James said simply. The water in town tastes wrong. Burns going down. The water here is clean. The children are delirious, Whitmore said quickly, clearly under her influence. But the parents were wavering, seeing their children standing, speaking clearly, defending the woman they'd come to hang. It shook the mob's certainty. Test it, Buck said suddenly. Someone ride back to town, get water from the wells, compare it to the creek water, see which one burns metal. I'll go, said Robert Olsen, looking at his twins with wonder. Several men went with him. While they waited, an uneasy truce held. The children refused to leave Ida's side, and their parents wouldn't risk forcing them. Buck kept his gun drawn, watching Whitmore especially. The doctor looked ready to bolt. When the riders returned, they carried 2 buckets. Without a word, Olsen dropped a new penny in each. The creek water did nothing. The well water turned the copper black in seconds, eating at it like acid. The silence stretched, horrible in its implications. How long? Mrs. Turner asked, her voice small. How long have we been poisoning our babies? Over a year, Ida said quietly. She held a cloth to her bleeding temple, but her voice was steady. Maybe longer. The mob's energy shifted, turning from her to Whitmore, but the doctor was already mounting his horse. "Stop him!" Buck shouted, but Whitmore spurred hard, racing for the tree line. He made it 10 feet before Lily spoke. "He took money to let us die." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered in a child's clear voice, and somehow, that was worse than all the shouting in the world. The mob caught Whitmore at the trees. What happened next wasn't justice, wasn't law. It was parents' rage given form. Buck didn't try to stop it. Neither did Ada. They stood with the children, protecting them from seeing what their parents did to a man who'd sold their lives for $50 a month. When it was over, when Whitmore's body swung from a pine branch, the mob returned different than they'd left. The righteous fury was gone, replaced by shame and something harder to name. "We were wrong, Mrs., Olson said, not quite meeting Ida's eyes. "About you. We were wrong. Don't touch me," Ada replied, and the words carried all the weight of years of fear, of stones thrown and curses spoken, of a woman forced to save those who despised her. They loaded the children carefully into wagons, preparing for the journey home. Parents thanked Ida with downcast eyes, pressing coins into a jar when she wouldn't take them directly, always careful not to touch. As the procession wound back toward Silver Ridge, Buck rode beside Ida's wagon. "They'll need more treatment," she said. "And new wells dug. The whole water system's compromised. I wired the Federals. They'll be here in a week." "A week?" She touched her temple, wincing. "How many more will sicken in a week? We'll save them," Buck said firmly. "Together. Don't touch me," she said. But she was looking at him as she said it, and he heard what she couldn't say. "I wish things were different. I wish I could afford to let you close." Behind them, smoke was already rising from Silver Ridge as the townspeople burned their poisoned wells and prepared to dig new ones. It was a start. But Buck knew the real poison, the fear, the hatred, the willingness to blame the outsider that would take longer to cleanse. Still, as he watched Lily chattering with the other children, alive and healing, he had hope. Sometimes it took nearly losing everything to see what truly mattered. And sometimes it took a woman who said, "Don't touch me," to teach a town how to reach for grace. The mine entrance gaped like a wound in the mountain's face as Buck descended into darkness once more. This time, he went alone. The federal marshals were still 3 days out, and every hour meant more poison seeping into the groundwater. He needed harder evidence, something that would hold up in a territorial court, something that would see the Eastern Continental men hanged proper. His lantern cast dancing shadows on the tunnel walls as he made his way deeper than before, past the dumping ground, following a passage that showed signs of recent traffic. The air grew thicker, more toxic. He'd wrapped 3 layers of cloth around his face, but the chemicals still burned his throat. Then he found it, a natural chamber converted into an office of sorts. Crates served as desks, covered with ledgers and correspondence. A surveyor's map of Silver Ridge was tacked to a support beam, marked with red X's over properties. Buck studied it, realizing with growing horror that the X's marked homes where people had died or fled. The poisoners weren't just dumping waste. They were systematically depopulating the town to buy the land cheap. He gathered everything he could carry, stuffing ledgers inside his coat, rolling up the map. As he turned to leave, his lantern caught something metallic in the corner. A woman's locket, gold, expensive. He picked it up, and it fell open to reveal a photograph. A woman's face, beautiful but cold, with eyes that seemed familiar. "You shouldn't have come alone. Marshal." Buck spun, hand going to his gun. Tom Garrett stood at the chamber entrance, but he wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, the same rough types from before. All 3 held rifles. "Figured you might come back," Garrett continued. "Boss lady said you were too stubborn to let things lie." Boss lady? Buck kept his voice calm, calculating distances, angles. "Oh, you haven't figured it out yet?" Garrett laughed. "The great Marshal McCoy. fooled by a pretty face and a sad story. Before Buck could respond, she stepped into the light. Mrs. Whitmore, the doctor's wife, but not the mousy, nervous woman he'd seen around town. This version stood straight, commanded attention, wore authority like a cloak. "Hello, Marshal," she said pleasantly. "I was hoping we could avoid this unpleasantness. You're Eastern Continental. I am Eastern Continental. At least this branch of it. My late husband, and he is late now, thanks to your mob, was useful but ultimately expendable. Weak men often are." Buck's mind raced, reassembling everything with this new information. "You've been running this from the beginning. For 14 months, Silver Ridge was perfect, isolated, no federal oversight, a compliant doctor for a husband." She stepped closer, staying well out of reach. "We've done this in 6 towns already. The land values afterward. Quite profitable. You're poisoning children. I'm conducting business. The casualties are unfortunate but necessary. Progress demands sacrifice." "That's what you call murdering innocents? Progress?" Her smile was winter cold. "How many innocents did you kill in the war, Marshal? How many boys did you gun down wearing the wrong color uniform? At least my violence has purpose beyond politics." Buck's hand tightened on his pistol butt. "The war was different." "Was it? Tell me, did you feel righteous when you led that mob to my husband? Did you feel clean when they strung him up?" She shook her head. "We're not so different. You and I, we both do what's necessary." "Put the guns down," Buck said quietly. "Come with me. Peaceful. The Federals will find nothing. We're cleaning out tonight. By dawn, there'll be no evidence left. Just your word against mine. And who'll believe the man who consorts with witches? That's what this is about, Ada. The woman's an annoyance. She should have minded her own business. Let nature take its course. But no, she had to interfere. Had to save them." Real anger crept into Mrs. Whitmore's voice. "Do you know how much money she's cost me? I know how many lives she's saved. Lives that weren't worth saving. The poor, the weak, the expendable. Your precious Lily would have been dead already if not for that meddling." Buck drew and fired in one motion. Years of practice making it smooth as water. Garrett's rifle spun from his hands as he clutched his shoulder. Screaming, the other 2 men hesitated. And that was enough. "Drop them," Buck growled. "Now." They complied, rifles clattering on stone. Misses. Whitmore hadn't flinched. Impressive, but pointless. Kill us all, and Eastern Continental simply sends new representatives. We're a hydra. Marshal, cut off one head. Then I'll keep cutting." He gathered the evidence one-handed, gun never wavering. "You're going to write out a confession, full details, every town you've poisoned, every life you've taken." "I think not. Then you'll hang without it? Your choice." She studied him, this giant of a man who'd chosen justice over easy ignorance. "You really think you've won? That saving a few children changes anything? We'll be back, if not here, then somewhere else. Progress doesn't stop for sentiment." "Maybe not, but it'll stop for you." He bound them with rope from Garrett's pack, then marched them toward daylight. Behind them, the poisoned chamber waited like an open grave, testament to greed dressed up as enterprise. They emerged to find Ada waiting with a dozen townsmen. Word had spread of Buck's mission, and they'd come to help. But it was to Ada they looked now. This woman they'd nearly lynched, waiting for her word. "Don't touch me," she said when Mrs. Whitmore was brought close. Then, softer, "I don't need to. I can see your guilt from here. It clings to you like smoke." The federal marshals arrived early, drawn by Buck's urgent telegrams. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. Mrs. Whitmore maintained her cold dignity to the end. Even as the judge read the sentence, Garrett and the others broke, confessing everything in exchange for prison over the noose. But it was the town meeting afterward that mattered most. "We need new wells," Mayor Davidson said. "Fed's offering help, but it'll take everyone working together." "And Doc Whitmore's house?" someone asked. "What do we do with it?" "Burn it. came a voice from the back. Nothing good in those walls. No. Ida stood, and the room fell silent. They'd insisted she attend, these people who'd feared her. Make it a clinic for anyone who needs healing, regardless of what they can pay. You do that, Mrs. Olson asked. After everything? Healing isn't about the healer. It's about the need. She looked around the room, meeting eyes that had once held only suspicion. But I'll need help, supplies, assistance, people willing to learn. I'll help, Lily said immediately. She'd been growing stronger daily. The red marks now just faint memories on her skin. I want to learn. Others volunteered, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Plans were made, committees formed. Buck watched it all from the back of the room, seeing a town begin to heal itself. Later, as people filed out, he found Ida standing alone by the window, watching the sunset paint the mountains red. You could have demanded anything, he said. They owe you their children's lives. Debt's a poison too, different from what was in the wells, but just as deadly. She turned to him. Besides, I got what I needed, a purpose beyond mere survival. Don't touch me, she added, though he hadn't moved. I know, he said simply. Then, but maybe you could teach me about the healing, about the herbs and medicines. Lily wants to learn, and she'll need supervising. She looked at him, this giant who'd risked everything for justice, who remembered her boundaries even in chaos. You'd spend your days with the town witch? I'd spend my days with the woman who saved my niece. The rest is just words. For the first time since he'd met her, Ida smiled, really smiled, not the sad shadow she usually wore. Tomorrow, then bring Lily. We'll start with the simple things. He nodded and turned to go, then paused. Ida, what you said about touch making the gift stronger but more dangerous, is that why you keep everyone away? Fear of being overwhelmed? She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, partly, but also, connection hurts when it's ripped away, and it's always ripped away. Eventually, death, fear, human nature, something always tears it apart. Easier to never let it form. But you heal anyway. You connect anyway, just for those moments. Don't touch me, she said, but her voice was thoughtful now. Not yet, maybe not ever, but thank you for understanding why. Buck left her there, silhouetted against the dying light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Eastern Continental wouldn't give up easily, and changing hearts was harder than changing laws. But tonight, for the first time in years, Silver Ridge felt like it might become a real community, and in a house that had belonged to a poisoner, a woman who'd saved her enemies prepared to build something new. The physical poison was being cleansed from the water. Now came the harder task of cleansing the poison from their souls. The town hall had never seen such a crowd. Every seat was taken, people standing along the walls, spilling out onto the porch where they pressed against windows to hear. Buck stood at the front, the evidence laid out on tables, ledgers, photographs, water samples in sealed jars that caught the lamplight like liquid poison. 3 days ago, we hanged Dr. Whitmore, Buck began, his deep voice carrying clearly. Tonight, you'll learn the full truth of why. He presented it methodically, the way he'd seen lawyers do during his brief time in Austin. The contracts with Eastern Continental, the shipping manifests for barrels of cyanide, mercury, arsenic, the surveyor's map with its cold red X's marking targeted properties. $12,000, he said, holding up a ledger. That's what they paid Whitmore over 14 months. 1,000 lives planned for profit. The crowd stirred, anger rippling through like wind through wheat. But when Buck brought out the photographs from the mine, the dumping ground, the poisoned pool that fed their wells, anger turned to horror. My baby died last spring. Mrs. Campbell said, her voice breaking. Doc said it was mountain fever, but it was this, wasn't it? We poisoned our own baby with every sip of water. Others began speaking up. Children lost, mysterious illnesses, livestock that sickened and died. The pattern emerged clear as mountain air, death following the water table, spreading from the mine like roots of some poisonous tree. "Where is she?" Judge Hartley demanded. "This Mrs. Whitmore? She should hang higher than her husband." "Federal custody," Buck replied. "Trail starts next month in Denver, but that's not why we're here tonight." He nodded to Ida, who rose from her seat in the front row. The crowd went silent, not the hostile silence of before, but something almost reverent. She walked to the table, picked up one of the water samples. "This is from the Turner well," she said, her voice carrying despite its softness. "See how it's turned yellow? That's arsenic reacting with the iron in your pipes. This one, from the school, the green tinge is copper sulfate. Poison in every cup our children drank." "Can it be fixed?" Robert Olson asked. "The water, the land, can it be cleaned?" "The land heals. Given time, new wells must be dug, far from the contamination. The old ones sealed forever. It will take work, money, sacrifice. But yes, it can be done." "Show them," Buck said quietly. Ida hesitated, then placed her hand on the contaminated water sample. The crowd leaned forward as her eyes went distant, that familiar look of seeing beyond the present. When she spoke, her voice carried echoes of deeper knowledge. "I see rain washing the mountain clean. I see green returning where poison killed. I see children playing by clear streams. But first," she gasped, swaying slightly, "first comes the reckoning." "What reckoning?" Hartley asked. She opened her eyes, looking directly at him. "The truth. All of it. Not just Whitmore's guilt, but ours. How many times did someone complain about the water's taste? How many times did we ignore the signs because believing meant accepting horrible truths? You can't blame us for..." "Mrs." Henderson began. "I blame no one, but healing requires honesty. We saw sickness and looked for someone to blame. We found our witch." She gestured to herself with bitter humor. "Because that was easier than seeing the real evil among us." Young Lily stood up. "She's right. When I was sick, you all wanted to burn her cabin, but she was the only one who tried to help, the only one who saw the truth." "The child speaks wisdom," said Reverend Walsh, surprising everyone. He'd been silent through the crisis, but now stood with Bible in hand. "We let fear guide us, let suspicion rule, while this woman, who we called cursed, risked everything to save our children." One by one, people stood to speak. Confessions, mostly. Thomas Turner's father admitted he'd noticed the water tasted wrong months ago, but said nothing, not wanting to seem foolish. Mrs. Garrett wept as she told how she'd thrown stones at Ida's cabin after her son fell ill, needing someone to hate. Through it all, Ida stood silent, that careful distance maintained even in the crowded hall. When the confessions finally ended, Mayor Davidson cleared his throat. "The town council met this afternoon. We're proposing to make Mrs. Johnson our official healer, with the Whitmore house converted to a proper clinic. All in favor?" The vote was unanimous, though Buck noticed how some hands rose more slowly than others. Old prejudices died hard, even in the face of truth. "There's more," Davidson continued. "Federal government's offering compensation for the poisoning. Not much, but enough to dig new wells, maybe expand the school. We need someone to oversee the funds, make sure they're used proper." "Buck," someone called out. "Has to be Buck." "And Mrs. Johnson," another added. "They exposed this. They should fix it." Buck looked at Ida, saw her slight nod. "We'll do it together," he said. "Full accounting of every penny. Public meetings for every decision. No more secrets in Silver Ridge." As the meeting wound down, people approached Ida, tentatively, maintaining that careful distance she required. Apologies were offered. Gratitude expressed. She accepted both with the same quiet grace, never quite meeting anyone's eyes. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Buck found her outside, breathing deep of the night air. "That was hard for you," he observed. "Harder for them. It's easy to hate what you fear. Harder to accept you were wrong." She wrapped her shawl tighter. "Some never will, accept me. I'll always be the witch woman to them, even if I'm their healer too. Does that matter? Once, it would have consumed me. Now, she looked up at the stars. Now I have work to do, purpose beyond survival. That's enough. Ada, Buck said carefully. During the meeting, when you touched the water sample, you saw something else, didn't you? Something you didn't share. Her silence was answer enough. What did you see? Don't touch me, she said automatically, then sighed. I saw men in offices far from here, planning already. Other towns, other schemes. Eastern Continental has roots deeper than we know, cutting off this branch. She shook her head. Mrs. Whitmore was right about one thing. They're a hydra. Then we keep fighting. Word's already spreading. Other towns are testing their water, asking questions. Maybe we can't kill the hydra, but we can sure as hell give it scars. She smiled then. Small, but real. You sound like Samuel. My husband. He believed in fighting the good fight, even when winning seemed impossible. Wise man. He would have liked you, I think. A man who remembers don't touch me, even in crisis. She paused. Though he might have been jealous. Buck's eyebrows rose. It was the first time she'd ever alluded to whatever was growing between them. Ada. Not yet, she said softly. Maybe not ever, but I wanted you to know. It's not just fear anymore, not just protecting myself from the gift's burden. It's also... She struggled for words. You make me want things I thought I'd buried with Samuel. Dangerous things. Hope, connection. And that terrifies me more than any mob. Before he could respond, Lily came running up. Uncle Buck, Mrs. Johnson, they're starting to dig the new well by the church. Everyone's helping. Indeed, torches were gathering across town as people converged with shovels and picks. Even at this late hour, the work of healing had begun. Go on, Ada told Buck. They need their marshal's strength. I'll check on the children still recovering. He wanted to say something more, to acknowledge what she'd just admitted, but Lily was tugging his hand, and the moment passed. As he walked toward the lights, he glanced back to see Ida watching them go. A solitary figure caught between darkness and flame. At the well site, he found the town transformed. Former enemies worked side by side, the Olsons and Turners, who'd feuded over water rights for years, shared tools and labor. Mrs. Henderson, who'd led the mob against Ida, was organizing food for the workers. It's like something broke loose, Reverend Walsh said, appearing at Buck's elbow. All that poison in the water, maybe it was poisoning our souls too, making us mean, suspicious. Maybe, Buck allowed, though he suspected the poison in their souls was older than any mind dumping. Or maybe nearly losing everything showed folks what really matters. They dug through the night, taking turns, and by dawn had reached clean sand that promised good water. As the first bucket came up, clear and pure, a cheer went through the crowd. Ida appeared then, leading the last of the recovering children. Their parents rushed to them, tears and laughter mixing as families reunited. Buck watched her stand apart, observing the joy she'd made possible but couldn't quite share. Don't touch me, he heard her whisper to herself, like a prayer or a penance. But then Lily broke from the crowd, ran to Ida, stopped just short of embracing her. Thank you, the girl said simply. For saving me, for saving all of us. Ida's eyes glistened. Thank you for believing I could. The sun rose over Silver Ridge, painting the mountains gold and red. A new day for a town reborn from poison and prejudice. There would be struggles ahead. Eastern Continental wouldn't give up easily, and old hatreds would resurface. But for now, in this moment, a community stood together around a well of clean water, united by the simple act of choosing hope over fear. And at the edge of it all, two damaged souls, a giant who'd lost too much and a healer who couldn't allow herself to be touched, watched the dawn and wondered if broken things might sometimes be mended after all. The trial in Denver drew crowds like a hanging, but with the electric feel of history being made, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore sat straight-backed in the defendant's chair. her city finery out of place in the rough territorial courthouse. Buck testified for 3 hours, his deep voice never wavering as he laid out the evidence. Maps, ledgers, contracts, a conspiracy drawn in ink and paid for in children's lives. When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, Eleanor Whitmore simply nodded, as if she'd expected nothing less. They led her away in shackles, and Buck heard her say to her lawyer, "Wire the Home Office. Tell them the Silver Ridge branch is closed." A month later, Silver Ridge hardly looked like the same town. New wells dotted the landscape, their fresh-dug earth like scars healing clean. The clinic that had been Doc Whitmore's house bustled with activity, and at its heart, Ida Johnson worked miracles with herbs and wisdom, teaching anyone willing to learn. "Hold it steady," she instructed Lily, who was grinding willow bark with focused determination. "Too rough and you lose the medicinal oils." Buck watched from the doorway, still amazed at the transformation. The clinic's main room held 12 people, some seeking treatment, others learning. Mrs. Olson was copying herb preparations into a ledger. Young Thomas Turner wrapped bandages under Ida's supervision. Even Mrs. Henderson, pride swallowed hard, was there to learn poultices for her husband's mining-scarred lungs. "Marshal," Robert Olson called from outside. "Got a minute?" Buck found the town council gathered on the clinic's porch. Mayor Davidson held a telegram, his face troubled. "From the territorial governor," Davidson said. "Eastern Continental's filed injunctions, claiming we violated their property rights by sealing the mine. They want damages." "Let them come," Hartley said, surprising everyone with his vehemence. The judge had changed since the trial, his rigid righteousness tempered by near tragedy. "We've got every newspaper from here to San Francisco writing about what they did. Public opinion matters, even to robber barons." "There's more," Davidson continued. "The governor's sending a special investigator, wants to make sure we're not—" He glanced at the clinic. "Harboring undesirable elements." Buck's jaw tightened. "Meaning Ida. The telegram doesn't say, but—" Davidson shrugged helplessly. "You know how these things go. A woman of her background, with her abilities, makes people nervous. She saved this town. We know that, but Denver doesn't. And with Mrs. Whitmore's lawyers making noise about enchantments and undue influence." Buck turned to see Ida in the doorway. She'd heard everything. He could tell by the resigned set of her shoulders. "I'll leave," she said quietly. "If it keeps trouble from the town." "No!" The word came from 12 throats at once. "Mrs." Campbell stepped forward, the woman who'd lost her baby to the poisoned water. "You're not going anywhere," she said firmly. "This investigator wants to see Silver Ridge? Then he'll see all of it, including the woman who saved our children when nobody else could or would." The investigator arrived 3 days later, a thin man named Prentice with sharp eyes and a sharper manner. He questioned everyone, took notes in a leather journal, examined the evidence from the trial. Buck shadowed him, making sure he saw the full truth. On his last day, Prentice asked to meet Ada alone. Buck waited outside, pacing like a caged bear, while Lily pressed her ear to the door. "I can't hear anything," she whispered, frustrated. An hour later, Prentice emerged, face unreadable. Ida followed, maintaining her usual careful distance. "Mrs. Johnson has been most illuminating," Prentice said. He looked at Buck. "You're a fortunate town. Marshall, not many places have someone willing to shoulder such burdens." He left that afternoon, his report still a mystery. But a week later, another telegram arrived. The territorial government was establishing Silver Ridge as a test case for public health initiatives. Funding for the clinic, official recognition for Etta as the town's healer, even a modest salary. "We did it," Davidson said, reading the telegram aloud at town meeting. "We're official." The celebration lasted well into the night. Music spilled from the saloon. Families picnicked by the new wells, and for once, the shadow of the poisoning seemed to lift. Buck found Ada by the creek, away from the crowds. Moonlight turned the water to molten silver, and she sat on a boulder, shoes off, feet dangling in the current. "You're not celebrating," he observed, settling his bulk onto a nearby rock. "I am, in my way. Listening to joy is its own celebration." She pulled her feet up, wrapping her arms around her knees. "Besides, crowds still make me nervous. All those people, all that need and fear and hope pressed together, even without touching. I can feel it. The gift has drawbacks. Everything does." She looked at him sideways. "Even being a giant has its challenges, I imagine." "Doorways, mostly," he said, drawing a small smile from her. They sat in companionable silence, the creek babbling between them. Then Lily's voice called from the path. "Uncle Buck, Mrs. Johnson, they're starting the fireworks." Indeed, someone had brought Chinese firecrackers from the mining camps. Bright flowers of light bloomed over Silver Ridge, reflecting in the creek, painting wonder on Lily's upturned face as she ran to join them. "She wants to be a doctor," Ada said. "A real one, with proper training. Says she'll go east to study, then come back and run the clinic when I'm too old. You'll never be too old. Everything ages. Buck, even those of us who seem timeless." She stood, brushing off her skirts. "She'll be good at it. Better than me. Probably. She has the gift for healing, but not the burden of visions. She can touch freely, love freely." "Ada, don't touch me," she said, but gently. "Not yet. I know what you want to say, have wanted to say for weeks now, and part of me wants to hear it, but, she looked up at him, this giant of a man who'd become her anchor in storms she'd never expected to weather. "But I'm learning something harder than keeping distance. I'm learning to let people close, just a little, to trust that not every connection ends in loss. It's like teaching my heart to speak a new language, and I'm still on the simple words. I can wait," Buck said simply, "however long it takes." "Don't touch me," she whispered, and then, so soft he almost missed it. "But thank you for wanting to." They walked back toward town together, careful space between them, but something invisible connecting them nonetheless. The fireworks painted the sky in reds and golds, and the people of Silver Ridge danced and sang, celebrating their survival, their new beginning. At the clinic, Lily grabbed their hands, remembering at the last second not to take Ida's directly. "Look what I made." She held up a leather journal. "For recording patient treatments, Mrs. Henderson helped me bind it." "It's beautiful," Ida said, and Buck heard the emotion she kept carefully controlled. "The first entry is already written," Lily said proudly, opening to show them. In careful script, she'd written, "Silver Ridge Clinic, established 1871. Head healer Mrs. Ida Johnson. Purpose, to provide healing to all who need it, regardless of station or circumstance. To teach the healing arts. To remember that the greatest poison is fear, and the strongest medicine is hope." "Don't touch me," Ida said, but she was crying now, silent tears that caught the lamplight. "Oh, child, don't touch me, but know that my heart touches yours." Later, much later, when the celebrations had died and the town slept peaceful by its clean wells, Buck made his final rounds. He found Ida on the clinic porch, wrapped in her shawl, watching the stars. "Couldn't sleep? Too much happiness?" she said. "I'm not used to it. It feels fragile, like something that could shatter if I hold it too tight, or something that could grow stronger with tending, like those herbs you cultivate." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "You know what the strangest part is? I've spent so long saying don't touch me that I'd forgotten why I started. It was supposed to be protection, but somewhere along the way, it became a prison. Prisons can be opened." "Yes," she agreed. "But it takes time, and courage, and sometimes—" She stood, moved closer to him than she'd ever allowed before. Not touching, not yet, but close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, smell the sage and lavender that clung to her hair. Sometimes it takes a giant of a man who's patient enough to wait while a broken woman learns to be whole again. "Don't touch me," she said, raising her hand between them. Then, slowly, carefully, she turned her palm toward his. "But perhaps you could reach toward me, and I'll reach toward you, and maybe, in time, the space between will grow small enough that 'don't touch me' becomes 'please, hold my hand.'" Buck raised his massive hand, mirroring hers, an inch of air between their palms. He felt something there, warmth, possibility. The future writing itself in the space between their almost touching skin. "I'll wait," he said again. "However long it takes." "Don't touch me," she whispered, but she was smiling now. Really smiling. "Not yet, but Buck, that day is coming. I can see it, clear as any vision. The day when I'll say the opposite. When I'll say—" She stopped, overcome. But he knew. They both knew. Somewhere in Silver Ridge, a baby cried and was comforted. Somewhere, clear water flowed from clean wells. Somewhere, children slept peaceful, their bodies free of poison, their futures bright with possibility. And on a porch in a town reborn, two souls reached toward each other across an inch of sacred space, learning that sometimes the greatest healings happen not with touch, but with the promise of touch to come. The gentle miracle of not yet becoming soon, becoming yes. "Don't touch me," the woman whispered to the night. But oh, how her heart had already leapt the distance her body could not yet cross.